I didn't know we were drinking Corona right now.
Oh,
That'd
Jesus.
be me.
Yeah.
Retirement has its privileges.
Right.
Quack.
Hey there, it's Tomo. Welcome to Beyond the Blind, a Tom Ozone podcast. I'm joined, as always, by Bill Brown and Brad Allen, and two very special guests today, Dr. Mike Brasher, the senior scientist at Ducks Unlimited, and Dr. Phil Lavretsky, an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Texas at El Paso. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. Excited.
So the DuckDNA project is about genetics and hybridization of wild ducks. Can you tell us about the project and what you're hoping to get out of it?
One of the primary questions that sort of was the impetus for the project, and a lot of the work that Phil's been doing recently, is to help assess the prevalence and distribution of game farm mallard genetics across the country and across North America, if we can kind of expand to that level at some point. And there's a whole lot of reasons for wanting to understand that issue. But beyond that, we're building this phenomenal database of waterfowl genetics that will serve as a source of information to answer a whole host of questions, many of which we're just now beginning to sort of formalize. And so it's hunters are the key feature of this, and it allows us to collect samples from a large geography throughout the hunting season. This type of work would be impossible logistically and prohibitively expensive to do without the aid of hunters that are distributed all across this country and getting their hands on millions of ducks every year. So we've been really pleased with it, and hope you as people that have participated in it are as well. I'm going to turn it over to Phil and let him add anything that he wants to there.
I've been doing this for a little over a decade now, and as I started to build data sets and questions surrounding those data sets, I would sit in my own blind and be like, man, if I could just get like some hunters to participate, I could get all sorts of data that would otherwise be impossible, as Mike just said. And then we started looking into the whole mallard issue, which was really a question about black ducks initially, and then obviously segued, as much of our research does, right back into mallards. So that's when Mike and I started having these conversations, when we started to think about how can we actually implement, whether people would, you know, think that this is a good idea, whether they wanted to participate, whether they would actually do it correctly. A lot of steps had to come into play. We finally came together with a product that I will say that I'm incredibly happy with, because thousands of samples, and we still have less than 1% failure rate, which is phenomenal, given that I know that a lot of these tissue samples sit in people's trucks, throughout the season and go through freeze thaw and all sorts of stuff that's bad for DNA. Yet, the hunters are participating; they're doing the things correctly, and we've essentially created waterfowl as the largest repository of a wild animal, and starting to compare to some agricultural based databases, or even humans. Well, we'll never catch up to humans, but you know what I mean.
So, Dr. Phil, you were already doing this work, right? But even before this project.
So my team specializes in mallard-like ducks all around the world. If you look behind me, you can even see one of our scientifically collected birds from New Zealand. So we get to go and study these mallard-like ducks all over the world. If people don't know this, there's about 14 of them, depending on your taxonomic groups. And in fact, the mallard itself is a shoot off. So they evolved about 1 million years ago. The original group evolved about 2 million years ago in Africa, and then sort of spread around the world, with the mallard evolving that green head about 1 million years ago. In the last 500,000 years, mallards came to North America through glacial and other events, essentially pocketed out, and eventually evolved into what we consider the mottled duck, Mexican duck, and the black duck today. And there's a lot of caveats there as well. But generally speaking, I knew that these things are so closely related that I would need an incredible amount of data to really distinguish them and ask finer geographical questions of where hybridization is a problem. If it is a problem, how do we deal with it? How can we use this information to better inform management decisions or legal decisions potentially? If the hybridization issue is a problem with domestic birds and so forth. So, and what was happening not so long ago was that hunters would just generally be like, "Hey, man, I harvested this cool duck. I'd love to know what it is. Can you do that for me?" And of course, if I would just say yes. As a hunter, I'd want to know the same thing, and I was just excited that that person was excited about genetics as well, and so we just kept doing that. And then as it continued to grow, we knew I knew that there was something there, but I didn't know what the potential that really was there until talking to Mike and bringing and collaborating with DU and bringing this whole Duck DNA program into the fold.
For DuckDNA itself, so DuckDNA is the is a project that essentially takes the genetic work that Phil does and the sample collection that he does to the hunters. Duck DNA is the mechanism by which we involve hunters in this. There was no Duck DNA prior to this sort of partnership between Ducks Unlimited and UTEP. Phil was already doing his genetic sampling under standard sampling or your more traditional scientific sort of field sampling where you would go to a certain state or a certain wildlife management area, and his sample collection was restricted to those areas. But we knew there was this host of other potential samples across North America, courtesy of hunters, if we could figure out a way to effectively enlist hunters in the process of collecting that tissue from their harvested birds and then sending it in. So I think it was the hunting season of 21 and 22 whenever I reached out to Phil because he and I had been talking on the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I knew about this issue. He and I had just floated this idea of, man, wouldn't it be cool if, and I knew some hunters were already submitting hybrid tissue samples from hybrids that they've harvested, just sort of on the side, sending those to Phil or interacting with him directly. And we were thinking, man, it'd be cool if we could scale this up to answer some of these other questions. And so during that 21-22 hunting season, I told Phil to send me some vials with the appropriate buffer solution in it. I took those into the field with me when I was hunting just to test it out because I didn't want to go down this road. So I'm a hunter. I know the way hunting works. I know the situations that you're in. And if this was going to be successful, I knew that it would have to work within the ordinary activities of what a hunter does, either in the blind or back at the house once they return from the hunt. So that was, and then we had to make sure that the samples, when shipped and arrived at Phil's lab, would be viable. All of that checked out, and so it was that summer of of 2022 that we began to develop this, and it was first operational in 22-23, and now we've had 3 consecutive seasons where we have successfully rolled this out, and we've scaled it up a little bit each successive year. And I'm sure we'll cover this in multiple places, but if folks want to learn more about the project, want to learn how they can apply to participate, you can go to duckdna.com, read about it, check out some of the results from last year. uh, just this morning, I reviewed a draft summary of the results from this current year, 25-26. We'll be getting those posted to the website here in a week or 2 weeks or so. But there's still information on the website where you can learn about the project, see the type of information that we're collecting, see the responses that the response we've gotten from hunters. And yeah, we're planning on doing it again in 26-27 hunting season. So go ahead and learn about it and prepare yourself for the application period whenever it opens up later this summer.
Bill and I was part of it in 2024-25, and you
25,
did.
25, 26.
Yep. So we've got our certificates, and we'd like to go through them with you at some point here, during this broadcast. But I guess first we should talk a little bit more about the project and what is the concern with the game farm mallards, especially here in the Atlantic Flyway and in Maine.
Time to ramble on. All right. So, game farm mallards. What is a game farm mallard? Game farm mallard is a domestic breed that was developed in the 1630s in England for the specific purpose of supplementation for hunting on King's Land at that time. if you understand breeding, there is an older domestication event which was with mallards, but it was in 500 BC China, plus minus, and that resulted in all the breeds that you really think of when you're thinking of like going to a park and you see a bunch of park ducks. Those are like Pekin ducks, roan ducks, call ducks, runner ducks, Indian ducks, various breed types between them. But the game farm mallard was an independent domestication event for a very, very distinct purpose that we now understand better. So, wherever the English went, those birds went as well, which include Hawaii and New Zealand and all throughout Polynesia, actually, as well as in all throughout Europe. Now, what happened in North America was that in the wake of market hunting in the late 1800, early 1900, the wildlife managers started to think about how can we bolster populations. And in early attempts, they actually tried to captive breed wild mallards and black ducks, and that just didn't take. And but what happened was somebody must have known about this breed, game farm mallard. The word game farm mallard was identified in the earliest by the English in 1890. So that breed was established by then. And what we have done is determine that the genetics of the game farm mallard is not only at species level differences from a wild mallard. So they're about 10% different genetically. So think of a black duck and a wild mallard, which is only 1.5% different across its genome outside of these specific areas. So this is a tenfold difference in the game farm mallard as compared to a wild black duck and a wild mallard, or even a Mexican duck and a mallard, or a model duck and a mallard. So there's defining characteristics. And we knew that, that artificial selection works in a variety of ways, especially when you're domesticating, you're going to, kill off a whole bunch of individuals that don't produce and breed the ones you want and so forth. And just like with dogs or anything else. And that results in this, in a significant shift in their genetics. Anyways, so that's how we're able to distinguish that. Doing that, we then went back to museums and we sampled mallards from 1800 to today. And we can determine that pre 1910, there were no game farm mallard genetics or even old world A haplotypes in North America. And we can actually timestamp when game farm mallards were brought here and then operations starting and stopping and do this across North America. We're going to publish that hopefully here soon. But the main point is that they were brought into the Atlantic Flyway in the early teens and 20s of the 1900s. And production really started to ramp up to the point where about 500,000 per year were being released up to the 1960s. Ever since then, we roughly guesstimate about 250,000, although recent work suggests we're north of 500,000 still being released annually. And what happened is that the release of these birds onto the landscape resulted in complete hybridization. I don't know how else to put it, but like you guys are from Maine. The Northeast has a history with game farm mallards, Maryland, especially Jersey, other places like that. And dogmatically, even I was taught that these things aren't a problem because they are taught to stay on a pond. They don't leave. If they leave, they die. If they don't die, they definitely don't breed kind of concepts. But if that was the case, then their kids and thus their genetics shouldn't be on the landscape. Anyways, fast forward to 2023, and we showcase that's just a lot. That's not correct. There's game farm mallard genetics hybrids all over the place, and they scale to wherever we put them out there. So the places where we especially put them out, which is the northeastern part of the Atlantic Flyway, as well as the Great Lakes region, we see this growing population of hybrids and a decreasing probability of actually having a truly wild mallard. We also did the same thing in Europe to make sure we're doing apples to apples. And indeed, we got game farm mallards from a few breeders in Europe, and then genetically the same game farm mallard that we have here, as well as the source for the feral populations today that are present in New Zealand, as well as Hawaii. But the beauty is that we could do these and that we identified epicenters in Europe being France, and we know that they release about 3 million. And then as you get away from that area, you become more wild. And in North America, it was east to west. So as you go westward, you become more wild. So that really defined that we have genetically changed the identity at a population level. So the next question it was always, does that matter? Does a genetically non-wild mallard um, behave the same as a wild mallard, or is it the same thing? Does it really matter? Just because we changed the genetics, that maybe it didn't matter. For the last 5 years, we've been doing everything from putting these things into a CT scanner to a DEXA machine and looking at physiology, putting backpack trackers and actually doing my understanding migration of these different mallard types. Um, Feeding assays of these different mallard types, and obviously because we have lots of hybrids and known game farm and known wild, we can look at whether hybrids are an intermediate form in all these behavioral or biological studies. And indeed, study after study after study over the last 5 years, again, understand that this wasn't a known issue until 2019. So it's only been like 6 years of work, and we're trying to catch up as quickly as possible and provide as much information. And in general, what we find is genetic scales with the capacity or lack thereof in migration, both in fall, which was actually that paper got accepted 3 days ago, as well as spring. So we published that paper last year. So what's happening is mallards have more game farm in them, they have basically a lack of ability to move. They have more of a random walk than they do a true migratory pattern. And that actually gets to our other study where we looked at physiology, and we actually show that they put on fat in a completely different scale than a true wild mallard. On top of it, the female game farm mallard has been transformed where her bones are actually less dense. This is brand new. Mike hasn't even heard this. They're actually less dense because she's using up the calcium for all the egg production. And it's statistically significant in the only bird. And it's wild. Anyways, so the other part of it out of Ben Lukanen's work that just got published is that basically we have a bird that is physiologically not adapted to make long distance movement because we took its fuel away, but also we shortened its wings and we transformed its bill and its legs to be this like more chicken-like animal, and that chicken-like animal scales with genetic ancestry on the landscape as well. So hybrids are intermediate forms given the amount of ancestry of wild versus game farm ancestry. So you have a bird that used to be a jumbo jet that can make these long distance movements to a bird that has these shorter wings and essentially no fuel. And so we predicted that they would make these like hopscotch events, essentially not being able to move very long distances because they can't. And that's what we saw in the telemetry data. On the feeding side, on top of it, is that they have a reduction of up to 25% in females and 50% in males in their ability to filter feed. So you can see it would take 2 times as much feed and times as much time to get the same calories as a wild bird. In those analyses, we also showed that wild mallards feed very quickly and get their food and get out, versus a game farm mallard that is just this like slow, like, you get to McDonald's and you just sit there and eat all day. And it dawned on me that that's basically what we probably picked for, right? There's food all the time, so why rush it, kind of thing. But the problem is that on the female side, not only do they breed earlier and make up to 100 eggs these days, as long as they're on a high protein diet, but they don't actually sit on nests or finish nest initiation or a completion of nesting behavior. And with Ben Lukanen's work, his team went out, and every time there was a failed nest, they went out and they asked what happened. And what happened was that birds that had 30% or more game farm in them had a significant difference in their ability to actually complete nesting. So essentially, they get there. There might be a halfway attempt of creating a nest bowl, but there'd be eggs everywhere, sort of what we saw in a cage. And so the nest didn't fail because of predation. It failed because she left. So so there's a whole bunch of biological and ecological differences between them that also scale within the hybrids themselves. But the problem is that those types of birds are making up more and more proportionally of a population, both in the Great Lakes and in the Northeast part of the Atlantic Flyway. And as you increase those types of individuals, you expect a population decline or shift. And it is coinciding with areas where we are seeing mallard declines. Now, DuckDNA allows us to basically monitor this in almost real time, but we can also start asking the question whether the presence of game farm mallards have other unintended consequences to other species. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
That's
Well, that-
very
Bill.
interesting. How can they persist? It sounds like, given all those negatives, that they ought to just dribble out.
Correct, except they go where they can survive, which is urban settings,
I got you.
right? If we got rid of people and the urban areas, yeah, natural selection would definitely take over, and you'd see a big old population crash, and then voila, maybe
Mhm.
wild mallards again. But that because of the heterogeneous nature, but more importantly, we never turn off the spigot. There's still again, what we've encountered is about 500,000 more of these things coming in every year. Now, the problem is that when we tracked changes in ancestry through time, at least in the Mississippi Flyway, they perfectly tracked with times when populations were low. So production went up and their ancestry went up. So my concern right now is we're at a low level in the mallard population, which I would then hypothesize, given what I've seen in the history, that production is going to go up and potentially why maybe in the Great Lakes region things are getting worse and worse every single year.
how is this going to affect the black ducks, which is that's a big population of mallard-like ducks here where we are in the northern
Yes.
part of the Atlantic Flyway.
Yeah, so black ducks were the original question that I posed to even get into this story. I wasn't looking for game farm mallard ancestry. What happened was I was studying black ducks, and I wanted to know if there was a genetically, quote unquote, pure black duck out there still, or are they genetically extinct themselves? And in 2019, we published a paper where we did hundreds of samples, and what happened was there was this there's still black ducks around, and we can now genetically identify them. B, what appears to have been occurring is that while the hybridization rate is up to 25%, those hybrids backcross into the mallard pool and not the black duck pool. And that's why we have black ducks still around. But C, that there was this weird genetic signature within mallards and mallard black duck hybrids that went east to west. So then in 2020, we published another paper where we went back in time for the first time. So pre 1900 mallards and black ducks. And we actually show that a good black duck today is identical to one of 150 years ago. Mallards west of the Mississippi are identical to a mallard from 150 years ago. But those mallards in the Atlantic Flyway today have been genetically changed, and they were a direct effect of breeding with game farm mallards. And they no longer look like a mallard from 150 years ago, from the same exact location.
Now, is there a differentiation between coastal black ducks and inland black ducks?
So this was something that we're hoping to study with DuckDNA because I haven't had the time. But when I look at when I get like a cluster of black ducks and I'm like, wow, this is a whole slew of true black ducks. And I look over, they're almost always coastal. And so my current hypothesis is that those are true birds out of the boreal forest. Here's how I put it. The black duck exists because the boreal forest exists. And I think that they stabilized at a carrying capacity because they sort of like the mixing happened, the black ducks got out of much of the southern part of the U.S. part of the Atlantic Flyway, and what was left are still good black ducks, and they're largely stable because of the forests of Quebec. That's my hypothesis. And those are the birds going on the coast. But interior, like interior New York, um, interior like Jersey, particularly, um, very few quote unquote good black ducks. Mostly hybrids, and something I didn't consider when we were publishing the 19 paper because it just I didn't know. But many of them are black duck mallard game farm hybrids. And I should have, actually, I think it was last year or a year and a half ago when I went to Mike and I was like, why did I think you have all these mallard game farm hybrids? Why wouldn't you have a game farm wild black duck hybrid? And that's the most direct consequence of game farm mallard introduction to another non-mallard species would be the black duck.
Brad was talking recently about how you didn't see a mallard in Maine till 1975.
I think so, and I shot it.
Well, of course.
Good for you.
Well, of course you did. But there was mallard releases even in Maine back in those days, and you were trying to look for the records of that.
There were a lot of releases in a very popular hunting area in coastal Maine, and I never thought they were released in an area called Mare-Meeting Bay, and I never thought many of those mallards ever made it out of the bay. We didn't get band recoveries of them all over the place. I think their survival was pretty low. But one of the things that fascinated me, and I've mentioned this to my friends in the past, is we used to band black ducks on the coast of Maine, on the Bar Harbor area, and a lot of the birds we were getting were 10, 12-year-old birds that we'd banded 10 or 12 years previously. And it came to our attention that these were birds coming out of Labrador, and they weren't getting to Maine until January, and when the season had closed, and that's when we could band and put out bait, of course. And they had very, very good survival rates because they weren't exposed to any hunting. But boy, they were true black ducks, and they were big 4-pound birds. They were impressive.
To the point of the survival, you are correct.
Mm-hmm.
So the best study was actually done in Sweden, and they found that the survival rate of a game farm as compared to a wild is about 3%. But as I tell people, if you took 3% of even if let's just say 250,000 every year in and year out, that's still a lot of individuals, and genetics doesn't it's a lineage of time, right? It's not just a one-time event if that hybrid is not a mule. And unfortunately, these aren't mules. And the more urbanization that allows for even further survival, right? They just got to survive into the breeding season. And that's what we're seeing. I think that the survival is actually extended in time due to urban settings and their ability to survive in those areas where people give them bread or corn.
We've seen some pretty surprising warmer winters these days too. Climate change has certainly probably favored a game farm kind of individual, I would think, because it's not as rough and cold as it used to be.
Absolutely, yeah. So that gets back to the physiology. Yeah, if we would have really harsh weathers where a true fat wild mallard or black duck or any other true wild bird could survive, they wouldn't. At least what we're seeing physiologically. But as you again have more golf courses and open water, kind of like I guess the non-migratory goose problem, right? They can make it in the back of Walmart or Cracker Barrel, as we've seen. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that just perpetuates it. And again, they just have to survive long enough. Is an important note.
Back in 1983, for some reason, comes to mind. We were very, very concerned that mallards were going to swamp black ducks in Maine. It was a big issue, and
Yep.
I guess it's fairly safe to say that has not occurred.
No, but what did happen is by 1990, the Atlantic Flyway never went back to zero game farm mallard ancestry. So since 1990, the entire Atlantic Flyway, some states are better than others, like Maine or northern New York, essentially has a large, substantial amount of individuals that have a substantial amount of game farm mallard ancestry now. And so what's happened since 1990 is the probability of a hybrid pairing is actually higher than a hybrid wild where they could, back cross and maybe through back crossing, as we're seeing in the prairie potholes, you essentially reestablish the wild lineage that way. But because all you have are hybrids, you're always going to make hybrids. And to that point, I worked with H in Massachusetts, and we had maybe 300 or 400 samples from summer banded birds. So these are what you would consider "quote unquote" local production, and not one of them was a true wild mallard.
What can we do about it? I mean, do we just eradicate all game farm DNA mallards? Can we reintroduce wild DNA? What's the solution, do you think? I mean, I know you're just a scientist. You're not a,
This is the part where I stop.
Well, I mean, from a science standpoint, what could be done? I
Yeah.
mean, if everything was
Yeah.
if everything was on the table,
In that perfect world.
right?
The first thing is that somebody writes me a $5 million check so I have my endowment and can continue. The next part is to do what we've proposed in South Carolina. So I try to build in data sets that people keep asking me questions about, like, you don't have data for that. So one of the main things, we have a study in South Carolina where we actually banded a bunch of known game farm mallards. South Carolina is a prominent state of releases. We didn't buy any. We didn't ask for any more. All we said was, somebody is already buying them. Can we go and ban them or put telemetry units? For the simple question of what is survival and movement probability out of the site, out of the state, out of the flyway, for game farm mallards. So we're doing that so that way we have a one-to-one comparison of true wild versus a game farm. And then the next thing about the whole what can you do genetically? We're we're working in Hawaii and other places to understand exactly, can we, through management actions, transform the genetic integrity of a population. The short answer is theoretically yes, but we would require a whole hell of a lot more data and information to do it correctly.
Where are the wild mallards? Can you take California mallards?
You don't want to take Californians anywhere. Just talking
Thank you.
Don't allow them to leave California. As a Californian, I attest to that. Uh, Theoretically, yes, it is possible. The closest wild genetics you have, Quebec's pretty good so far, still. So you got those northern birds, Ontario. But really, your source is all the way to at Western Great Lakes and Minnesota and the Prairie Pothole region. That's like heart and center of wild mallards.
How many would you have to release?
Mike, do you want me to answer that?
Well, you're the
I'm-
one
I'm
that's been,
waiting for
you've been
it to-
doing the research on this.
Yeah. So how many do you have to release? So I ran some model. We developed a model
Of course.
for Hawaiian ducks, not for mallards. But I said, okay, let's just play around with it. And I said, the way we publish these models, and essentially you can ask the question, I have this many birds, how many generations does it take to change the genetic ancestry? Or say, I have unlimited resources, just tell me what's the fastest route. The fastest route is that we would have to add 50 to 60,000 mallards per year for 3 years.
That's not
Yeah,
very
but
many,
that-
really.
but
That's
again,
not very many, really, right?
No.
Sounds doable.
Yeah,
But-
Right.
Phil, let me ask you this question though. That assumes that the release of game farm mallards has stopped,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. I assume that that's the case. If game farm mallard releases continue, then essentially it's a wipeout. There's
Yeah.
no reason. to
There's
do it.
no need, there's no sense in trying to reintroduce
Yes.
wild mallard genetics if you're still releasing game farm birds. Now, there have been some interest from some parties of asking that question. Well, can we raise wild mallards at the same quantity that we are game farm birds and release those. And so then we're not polluting the gene pool of the wild mallards that are occurring within our flyway. But I mean, my guess is that you would bump up against the same challenge that was encountered way back in the day, 100 plus years ago, where those truly wild mallards, truly wild black ducks, I think you'd probably be just thinking about mallards, are not, it's not as easy to propagate them in captivity at the numbers that you would need to maintain the type of captive release facilities that are in play right now.
If we could bring wild birds in, what does a captive setting have to look like? What, how do we manage it to ensure that the wildness is not gone? And then on top of it, even if you do have a true wild mallard born in captivity, does it act wild once released? So all of that information would have to first be studied before we attempt something as crazy as releasing 50, 60,000. Because but on the caveat of all of that, yeah, if you did have wild mallards, at least that would be in a captive setting, at least for a while. That would be okay, and it would help instead of continuing to add fuel to the fire that we are doing currently. You'd have a better bird. Maybe not for hunters, because my hypothesis or the paying hunters, or people who are going to these places, because those wild birds are probably not going to act like the game farm mallards that are, uniquely qualified to being shot.
So the ones that they're releasing, they're not staying on the property. They're going over to the refuge next door or whatever.
Some proportion of them are, and I've seen it. I've watched it. and they went directly into a wildlife refuge. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
and
there's
not
still
all of
ducks.
those.
There's still ducks, right?
Yeah.
There's still ducks. Yeah, you can't, especially you release the males, they're gonna go where they gotta go. And that's the other thing, is that they are a flocking duck. They also like feed, so they would go to a domestic flock, again, potential for transmission, and then they go to the wild flock, so forth and so on. But yeah,
Yeah.
that 100% happens.
And it's my understanding that not all of those release facilities are shooting facilities or shooting operations are the same way, operate the same. Some use release birds at shooting towers, some
Yep.
release birds right as they're at the fledgling stage, well in advance of the hunting season. Some do it right before a hunt, but not from a shooting tower. So there is some variation around how those different
Yes.
facilities and operations work.
Dr. Phil, as an end user, as a participant in the gathering of samples for you, what is the most useful sample that you can receive?
At every sample.
All samples are treated equally. It makes you
All samples are 100%. If it was like your kid's first green winged teal, it'd be treated just as important as the other, because I actually don't know which sample is the key, or the thing that breaks the dam open. And it's just about gathering that information. As Mike alluded to as well, we don't know what we're going to be able to do with this repository of data until we actually sit down and analyze it, or more students, more postdocs and personnel, and the types of analytical aspects that we're going to be doing, right? So it's beyond the mallard itself. All of these birds have lat longs and date stamps, so we can go into NOAA data and gather information on weather. We could go and Landsat data and gather information on habitat, and look at whether certain species have a propensity for a particular thing, and if it's genetically coded, or if it's or if it's something else, and how that breaks down in the hybrid process. On top of it all, more generally, what's been fascinating is the types of hybrids. It's beyond the mallard, well, beyond the whole game farm thing, but like mallards and gadwall, mallards and pintail and gadwall, green-winged teal and pintail, green-winged teal and gadwall, all sorts of stuff that we just didn't know existed until now. And to that point, female hybrids were always considered are they out there? Are they inviolable? like a mule, or is it simply the fact that we can't tell them apart because it's a brown duck? And now we know that not only do they exist, but also they're viable because we have back cross female hybrids as well. And so we're learning a ton. And one of the bigger question is, if all these birds can interbreed the way they do, how is it that they aren't just one thing? So that tells us a sort of mating is really strong, but maybe there's a probabilistic situation where if a whole bunch of unpaired male mallards settle in this area and there's a bunch of pintail, we might expect that there might be pintail mallard hybrids in the future. And so these types of more broad questions are of interest. On top of it all, also, how does disease play, right? We're putting out these game farm mallards. We have all these hybrid farm mallards. How does that interplay with disease as well?
Yeah, one thing that I would add, you asked about which sample is more important. One of the challenges with citizen science, participatory science, and it's a criticism that a lot of people that are involved in it receive, understandably so, is the data collected by the participating individuals still needs to be representative of the population that we're trying to make an inference about, that we're trying to talk about and trying to understand. So uh, one of the fears that we had is that maybe hunters that received this kit would hold on to those vials until they shot a bird that they thought looked weird or that was unusual. And when in fact, really what we want in an ideal world is a random sample of the birds that you harvest. We played around with some language to try to figure out how to communicate that. Ultimately, we decided that there's not an easy way to do so. Because we don't want people to not submit those interesting looking birds because they are real and they are a natural part of that population. So ultimately, the first 2 years, we didn't provide any guidance other than use these vials for three of the birds that you harvest, mallard like ducks that you harvest. This year, for about half the participants, we included a note that provided some instructions that said use these vials on the first three mallard like ducks that you harvest. And that was a way for us to try to introduce some randomness to their sampling because the idea is that the first three birds that come into their flock and that they shoot is sort of a random sample of the birds that would be occurring in that at that place and time. And so then we're going to go back this year and look at the genetic makeup of the birds that were sampled under that. Shoot the first three, or sample the first three birds that you shoot, to those that we didn't provide any guidance to, and just sort of always working through these different questions to understand the data that we're getting. Um, but ideally, these would be some kind of random representative sample of the birds that you shoot as a hunter, representing a random sample of the birds out there on the landscape.
Were this to be a hanging offense, I'd be the first person to be hung because I just waited till the end. I got to find something that's more unusual than the one I shot before.
Well, and so that's not like a death nail to the scientific study, because the other thing is when the sample size is so large and as it grows, then those types of things the effect of those types of things will become increasingly small, assuming not everyone is doing that. And the one thing that I can say is that the results coming in thus far in terms of the percentage of samples that show game farm ancestry across different states and subgeographies and individual states closely mirror what Phil has found in other studies where he has collected birds following, let's say, stricter scientific collection protocols, where he kind of is responsible for ensuring a true randomness of the samples that are being collected. So that tells us that any bias that may result from the things that from something like what you described is pretty small. Now, I'm not saying it's okay to do that. What I'm saying is that's going to happen, and we understand that. But in an ideal world, we want people just randomly sampling these birds, uh, and then if you shoot an interesting bird, let's say you're selected for our standard sampling program, and you get the kit that has three vials. We'd want you to use those three vials sort of in a random fashion. You just go out one day and say, I'm going to use one vial today. or you happen to shoot 2 black ducks at the same time, I'm going to use 2 vials on those 2 birds right there. Nothing in particular about them looks unique. They're just 2 black ducks that you shot out of the same flock. I'm going to turn those in. That's what happened to me one day this year when I was in Michigan. So that was sort of a random sampling event, at least with regard to a black duck harvest. So I forget where I was going with that. I got distracted by the joy of harvesting 2 black ducks.
Right.
You were going to say that
Yeah.
if you use them up and you shoot
Oh, that's right.
something
That's right.
interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you use up your 3 vials and then you shoot an interesting bird later on, get in touch with us. We could still set you up with another single vial sampling kit. So yeah, just a little bit of additional guidance for the folks that may be interested in participating.
And again, our partners in Michigan, with Michigan DNR, we continue to do summer banded birds, and the proportions there for the state are almost to the T to the ones that our hunters are submitting from the area. So, yeah. So far, the sample sizes at minimum are so large that whatever biases that hunters are including are statistically not significant.
Being a duck nerd, I applied for 2023, 24, did not get selected, got selected for 2024, 25. And I just, in knowing the purpose of the study, I said, all right, I'm going to send 2 mallards, and then I'm going to send a black duck that has got some white on the bottom of the speculum, just to see, and I kind of spread them out throughout the season, just to kind of see, I don't know, just give you more information about the migration and stuff like that. But we know friends that have also been part of this study, and all 4 of us actually hunt the same area on the coast. And I said, well, I don't want to send anything from there because they'll already get something from there, right? I mean, does geographic area, when you select somebody for the sample, are you planning on them getting their samples relatively locally?
We do try to achieve sort of a equal sampling across states, but that's as far as we go geographically because we realize people hunt in different locations. I may live in Memphis, but then I hunt a lot of times in Mississippi. We ask you some questions when you first apply, and like which states you primarily hunt in. So that's kind of where we can, but that doesn't mean that that's the only state that I hunt in. And and we don't want to restrict you to using those vials for only the state that you specified, because I've sampled birds from Michigan and Arkansas as well as Mississippi, and all of that is fine. We're just trying to get a roughly equal spread of participants across all 49 states. We did Alaska for the first time this past year. So we're trying not to control it to that fine of a degree because we don't want people to feel like they're constrained on where they want to use or can use those vials. If there's a certain thing that you're interested in, like, hey, I shot this bird in this estuary, this coastal system, and I know I'm going to be hunting in inland next weekend, I'm going to save 1 or 2 vials for that. That's fine. We figure that with enough time, if we do this for enough years, then all of those types of sort of nuances will be washed out in the overall variation and help us to will provide a more comprehensive understanding of the entire system. So all that stuff is fine. And the way you held back some of those vials for later in the season, totally fine as well. The fact that you chose that black duck because it had white on the speculum, we're learning that's not necessarily indicative of a particular outcome associated with the genetics. Phil can speak more to that. Those types of things are fine.
I'm really curious what that black duck turned out to be. Are we going to talk about that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're gonna go through our certificates. We're gonna go through our certificates here in just a minute.
Before we get into that, let me just ask you, as participants in the program, did everything work well for you? Were there any technical difficulties? Did the app work? Were the instructions clear? Did the shipping operate? Did it work correctly?
Yeah.
Let me
Tell us the good news.
let me speak to that as a non-techie 20-year regional director. I didn't know it was going to be as involved as it was. I've done the wing survey for years, and you clip a wing, you put it in an envelope, and you mail it off. I'm the guy that showed up. I took a really, really nice set of photos as required, but I forgot my vial at home. So now I didn't know my vial number. So,
Yep.
so we start again. So my pictures weren't as good, but I did complete the sample survey. Now that I've been through it, I'd do a better job with it if I was chosen to do it again.
That's understandable. I've kind of gone through that as well. Just knowing all of the steps that you're going to have to go through, and we went to, we built the infographic and had other people review it and made some tweaks. Despite all of that, again, whenever you're hunting, you got a whole bunch of other things going on. You didn't go out there just so you could collect a tissue sample to put in this kit, and so it is understandably a little more challenging than what we, just when we're sitting back in the office designing this, realize it's going to be. I've been there and I have to plan these things out, and we've changed some aspects of the infographic in response to our own experiences and those of other people that we've talked to. But anyway, yeah, once you've been through it and know the steps, then hopefully, as you said, it becomes a little easier if you're selected.
And that's not necessarily a flaw in your system. It's just I should have read the instructions a little more carefully.
No. And I was just going to say, something like this has actually never been attempted.
No.
This is the first time something like this has ever been attempted with any wildlife, period. We're learning as much as you're learning. We both Mike and I went out there like hunters initially, like he talked about earlier on, and we did it as if, I had no clue of science and just like did my thing. And so every year we see where we lack, or maybe there was a misconception or misunderstanding, and we try to get it better. Because again, there's no precedence to this. So to that point, I will say that hunters generally have done a phenomenal job. I mean, like, I'm better than some of my grad students, so like that's really great. I will also point to the fact that a lot of people think that a black duck is a female mallard.
Yeah, right.
Here, I wanted to also note, like you talked about your certificate. I want to tell you that I don't know anything about the samples. I just call them as they are. I don't look at them. I only ask for data if um if you call it a female and it comes out as a male, or you think it's this thing but it came out as this other thing, then I'll ask for pictures and just to confirm. For example, this year there was one person that called. They're like, "Oh, I shot a female mallard and it was a male gadwall, a female gadwall." And I looked at the picture. I was like, "No, that's a female gadwall."
Not me.
So genetics was right. So, and then again, what I've noticed is also that a lot of black duck, at least often, a black duck is called a female mallard / black duck. And oftentimes it's a male black duck.
This is the guy who had a freezer full of frozen heads.
Right.
I tried to tell him what it was like. I was like, you got to take pictures and stuff. Like, he had a freezer. I'm like, yeah, I'll use this
I'll
when
just
I
take a
get my
picture.
vials.
Yeah.
I'll take a picture of a duck and send it to him. But
Would you give me another chance?
We had several stories out of people saying, do you need these, people collecting extra birds for us and saving the heads, and then reach out to us and say, hey, do you need any more of these birds right now? Or can I go ahead and discard them? My wife is wondering when she's going to be able to reclaim her freezer. And so in that instance, I told the participants, like, no, we've got enough. I think he was one of our donors who had submitted 10 or maybe even more. Some people that donate to the project through a major gift program with Ducks Unlimited, that money goes directly to the project, and they get a larger number of samples with which to participate. And so he was one of those folks. And so I said, no, you've already provided enough samples. If you want to participate again next year, we can pick up then.
Do you encourage repeat applicants?
Sure. Now, one of we encourage, I say yes, sure. However, we have toyed around with the idea of trying to figure out how to give how to spread out the participation opportunities. I don't know that we're going to a point system yet, and then once you're selected, then you get reset to 0 points the way it happens with a lot of
Right.
Western draws and all
Right.
that kind of stuff. But we do want to provide greater opportunities for people to participate. The challenge with that is that this costs money, and it's when you factor in staff time, Phil's time, the analysis time, $25 for the shipping. Shipping is
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
is really expensive these days, as everyone that has mailed anything or
Mm.
shipped anything through FedEx or UPS can attest. So, our cost for one of these kits is if it's a single vial kit, you're probably looking at $125 to $150 all in. If it's a 3 vial kit, you're looking at $300+ for that kit. And so, thus far, we've had very generous donors that have sponsored the project and have enabled us to provide this free of charge. Um, we are probably going to be scaling back a little bit this year just to ensure sustainability of our funding sources, unless we're able to identify a major philanthropic source of funding. So if any of your listeners is one of those folks that has is interested in helping us with this, definitely get in touch. But we're also providing an opportunity for people to donate to Ducks Unlimited in exchange for a kit as a gift for that donation. We've had some people take advantage of that this past year, sort of a crowdsourced funding model. So we're still playing around with a whole bunch of options for how we're going to be able to continue this, and support the financial needs of it while providing ample opportunities for as many hunters as possible to participate.
Well, Brad has asked us many times, what's in it for you guys, right? You're still like, well, why are you doing it? And I don't know. It's
We're
not for the
nerds.
certificate. It's just because we're duck nerds, I guess. It's just like, like a band. You want to know where that duck came from. You want to imagine. I mean, they're an amazing animal in the sense that deer are in one area. Your turkeys are in one area. These ducks are flying 1,000 miles, and you get to encounter them for a few days and hopefully try to capture them. So it's amazing that you've got a great response to it, really.
Yeah, we had approximately 5,000 people apply to participate this past year. We were only able to, actually, it's going to be more than that, probably 5,500. We were able to only select, I think, 1,200, 1,300 of those folks. And I think it's just a testament to the love that people have for this bird and what it has meant to them in so many different ways. And they recognize when you're out there, and if you've hunted more than 5 years, you have seen change. You have seen change in how many birds there are right now, especially because of some of the things that we're seeing with drought and habitat loss in the prairies. You have seen changes to the habitats where you hunt. You have seen all sorts of other environmental change, and there is a role for hunters to play and always has been through any number of means. If you buy a hunting license, you're contributing to conservation, you're contributing to science. If you buy firearms, if you buy ammunition through excise taxes, you are contributing to those same things. When you report a band, when you participate in the harvest surveys, it's the same thing. You're contributing data that informs the scientific management of this resource. And this is another example of that. Hunters have shown up time and time again to with their pocketbook, with their time, and with the contribution of data that they get from the birds. And this is just another example of that. And people spend time on the things that they care about, that they love, that have been special to them. So if you want to say it's because you're a duck nerd, then that's fine. But ultimately, it's because you care about the birds, you care about their habitats. And if you think that there are people that are collecting data and answering questions that will help the long-term sustainability of those animals, then it's understandable that you'd want to participate.
Well said.
Yeah, and you really get more data from this than you do from the wing survey. What do you get? They say, well, you shot this many of this species. Like, I know, I sent you the goddamn wings, right?
Yeah, you're learning something about your bird at the most fundamental level is what I always tell people, right? So, especially if you do shoot, harvest an interesting bird, you can put it on the web and everybody puts on their scientific hat and has their own hypotheses as to what it might be, but genetics in life is the only thing that doesn't lie. And so you get to know and understand it. And then you can ask the question, well, this black duck is actually a black duck. Why does it have a little white wing bar? Well, maybe we had it wrong all this time.
So yeah, when we're talking about the app, the first thing I think I would say before we get into the certificates is that I wish I could access the pictures of the ducks that I submitted once once the certificate is issued, because you can't go back. I told Bill this year, if you're well, he didn't understand the whole thing anyway, but I told him, make sure you take separate pictures on your phone if you want to cross-reference when you get your certificates, because those pictures that you sent into the app are going to disappear as soon as your results are published.
That occurred to me too, because I'm a participant, so I go into my app and I want to do the same thing. But I have another place where I can go to see the photos.
You do. You do.
Right. Well, of course.
So I'm going to make a note and I'll take it to our team and I'll see if we can get people access to their photos and all because you don't get any of the other information either that you enter, the date, the
nothing.
habitat type, any of that kind of stuff.
No.
I'm going to see
No,
if we can get it so
no.
that when you can go back and see the data associated with each bird, including the photos.
I didn't know that they were lost, actually.
Yeah, it's gone.
Well, they're not lost.
No.
They just don't show
We
up.
we don't
Yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
access yet.
Yeah, they're just not accessible to us
To the
when we,
participant.
because you
Yeah.
get the certificate and you go, holy shit, that had 18% black duck in it. That looked like
No
the
way.
most beautiful mallard I've ever seen in my life. And you go, and then you'd want to go back to the pictures and say, are there some brown feathers under the wing? What am I seeing?
Yeah.
Something like that, where you can't unless you took separate photos yourself outside of the app, which doesn't happen. I mean,
I was also going to tell Mike that we should make it where people can use it as their own hunting catalog, as an addition to it. Yeah, I know.
that's the thing. How much server space do you have? I mean, I get
Yeah,
it. You don't want to keep everybody's information for years on end, but that would be one thing that I would suggest as an end user.
Yeah.
And then, all right, you guys want to take a look at the certificates from what we got?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. So, all right, so this was 2024, my first year, well, my only year, and this was a mallard. This was down back my house, and all right, so now this is what you're talking about, where it's got game farm mallard in it.
Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about, that especially in Massachusetts, a lot of birds are this 80-20 split thing. We're only now trying to figure out, well, like I said, we're seeing the effects when it's 30% or more. So this is where the back crossing has occurred, either through hybrid, or maybe there was a wild mallard introduction in there into that lineage at some point, or at least a couple times. Doesn't matter. Biologically, does that 15% matter? We don't know yet. We've got a ton of different studies going on to try to find a biological cutoff. But at this point, we have to basically cut it off at the point to which I can identify the parents, which is at 95%. That last 5% is ancestry that they hold. Because remember, the wild mallard was the ancestor to the game farm mallard. So there's always going to be some shared ancestry there that we just can't tell apart. But yeah.
And I'm looking at the photo here. I don't know if I can share my screen if y'all wanted me to even try that. But yeah, it looks like a mallard. I can also tell if it was harvested in late October. I'm looking at the tail on this thing. I don't see any notched tail feathers, so it probably tells me that this was an adult. So that probably also contributes to the fact that you thought it was 100% mallard, because I've had some of these as well.
Well, and it was. It just had some game farm mallard in it, but I mean, it was mallard.
Correct.
It didn't have any
that's
black
right.
duck in it. Yep. All right, so let's see.
You got that one.
Yeah.
Ooh.
The 88%er. I know that one.
Oh, you know that one? Yeah, right.
Well, we had a discussion of that, and now I'm guessing we're about to have that discussion again.
Yes, because we have a picture of that one.
Oh, this is the one that had a good stripe of white at the bottom of the speculum. And this was a black duck. This was shot about 20 minutes from my house. This says 88% American black duck. And species 2
However,
is
yes,
unknown. What does that mean?
it's not unknown. It is known, but the problem is that black ducks and true mallards, like I said, are only 1.5% different. So they share. Imagine like their genome just says like be a good duck everywhere, except for these specific areas where it says be a black duck or be a mallard. So they share a ton of ancestry. And by chance, some of these individuals share more or less of the ancestry. That sample and others similar, what happens is that we get a standard error when we bootstrap the data. And what the way the calls are is the point estimate, which you see there, but the thing that you don't see there is the standard error. And on that bird, the standard error must have brought that 88% to go above the threshold of 95%. In which case, I can't tell the difference that that's not a pure American black duck. The rest of it would be mallard, but it's not mallard because of hybridization, is what that is.
What do you mean it's not mallard because of hybridization? The white just appeared on
That's
its speculum just through genetics?
by their ancestral trait. Yeah. So in the
This looks
20
like this looks like a juvenile as well, Phil.
yeah. So let's go into that story. All right, so everybody's been taught that if you have any white wing on above or below the speculum, that would suggest that that individual for black ducks is a hybrid. That if you saw that in mottled ducks, that they would be a hybrid. But that's actually not the case. And when we reassessed the parts survey in the 2010-2011 hunting season that we published eventually in 2019, the probability that they actually were calling hybrids correct was about 60%. It's the flip of the coin. Even the mallards and black ducks, they're about 80% correct. So the problem is that these characteristics that we thought were indicative of hybrids and hybridization is not. And especially in juveniles, both and we published this on Mexican ducks, we published it on model ducks, and we have data for Hawaiian ducks, and we have preliminary data for American black ducks, that juvenile males will show mallard traits by chance that are actually lost if they survive to the second year, and in fact regained if they survive to their sixth year. You can imagine that first year as like a prepubescent male who can't control his testosterone, and that results in the expression or non-expression of particular genes that are naturally found in these birds because were derived from the mallard not very long ago. And we in every single one of those species we see the same pattern. Young males will show mallard-like traits by chance. If you have an adult showing mallard-like traits, then we can say that is very likely a hybrid. But again, if it is a 6-year-old, imagine it's an individual that's getting a bit old and he can't control his testosterone again. And again, you see the re-expression of mallard traits. So the genetics is there. It's a matter of expressing it, which we believe is a testosterone estrogen mechanism,
Now,
which we have data for as well.
Phil, this is a female. So does that same
Same.
process apply? I mean,
Yeah.
the plumage. If you get a juvenile bird, its plumage. I learned. I didn't know there was necessarily. Well, I didn't know how the genetics would come in to play on this. But whenever I was going through grad school and undergraduate, we were taught, the juvenile plumage, the definitive plumage. It's not until these birds become adults and they get their what we call their definitive plumage that we always associate with that species. And so this is an example of that, but it also sort of applies to some of the finer genetic aspects of what you described.
Exactly. Yeah. So you see this, and now we have several cases. So female mallards that have a problem with estrogen regulation. So if they've lost their if
The
they
ovary?
their ovaries, like we published in 22, as well as the ones that we had through DuckDNA, they essentially will look like a male mallard. So you're in high testosterone, you're breeding plumage. Because you're in high testosterone, the next breeding plumage should be non-breeding. So high testosterone leads to brown, and low testosterone leads to greenhead. And so if you can't derive testosterone or estrogen, then you will have greenhead over and over and over. So if you're not controlling them, you result in functionally inaccurate plumages. And that's what's happening with American black ducks, Mexican ducks, and mottled ducks, where some proportion, like in mottled ducks, 10% of the population naturally actually expresses white wing bar that we didn't know until we had genetics, and we're not actually indicative of hybrids. And the same thing for black ducks. Well, I don't know what that proportion is actually, because we haven't done that scale of study, but some proportion.
This is a real Pandora's box for our warden service in Maine. You know, yeah, you can kill a black. We could kill one black duck a year forever, and now two. And when we kill something other than that, we have to lobby to the game warden that this is a hybrid, and because you can kill 3 or 4 of them.
Well, 4, yeah.
Four.
They
Yeah,
just put some cold water on that for me.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, but most of my game warden colleagues, look for one double white wing bar, and you're clearly
And call it good.
clearly call it good.
Yeah.
But oh well,
Yeah, the white wing bar thing really throws a wrench into that issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it does. I got to get my argument straight next
Yeah.
hunting my next hunting season.
And again, on the black duck, I had a couple friends. They banded a bird. They called it a hybrid. Genetically, it came back as a wild or just black duck. And the following year, they recaught it, and it looked like a black duck.
Wow.
Oh, that's
Right?
Really?
As
That's
a
cool.
hatch year, it showed green in the head, had a little curled tail. All this, anecdotally, you'd be like, "Yeah, this is a hybrid." And the following year, it was a picturesque black duck.
That's very cool, but it's all new to me.
Yeah, right. All right, here's my most interesting certificate from November 18th. This was the most beautiful Drake mallard. I wanted to see
It's
that.
like
This was the picture that I wanted to see when I got the certificate. I'm like, holy crap, that had 19% black duck in it. Where was that? And of course, I wasn't able to see it, but
There's not much there, I can tell you. It's I don't know. There's maybe some fine indications of it if you knew where to look, but I certainly don't. I've had this as well, where I've had a second generation mallard black duck that whenever I sampled it and took the photo, I thought it was a 100% wild mallard, but it came back second generation, and so I questioned Phil on this numerous times. I'm like, "Are you sure? How can this be?" But then I shoot a bird that will be genetically identified as a 100% black duck, and so I know if I know Phil is comparing these against a reference set of black ducks, and so if the analysis was wrong on that second generation bird, then I don't see how I would end up getting that 100% match on the black duck that then I get a little bit later on. So
I was going to tell you the reference set for black ducks and mallards when I do that. So you have to understand, first I figure out everybody that's not a mallard-like duck. Then I do an analysis of just mallard-like ducks, identify Mexican ducks, Florida mottled ducks, and Western Gulf Coast mottled ducks, and I do a separate analysis with them. For the black duck, I then partner it with over 100, I think it's close to 200 black duck and 200 mallard reference sets to get the most accurate assessment as I can for those birds.
yeah. And so I get some of those black ducks that come in 100%. And so I know that Phil's reference data set for black ducks has to be all black ducks.
But what you're seeing there is that whole back crossing into mallard, as we talked about earlier, is that it's a lot of mallard game farm with a little bit of black duck because something happened at some point. And again, if you have a bunch of hybrids, that 20% black duck could just easily be like floating around because there's like a bunch of hybrids. It's complicated. It's complicated in my own head. So I don't know how. Yeah.
let's look at the actual certificate itself. So, all right, I think I understand. I mean, we're relatively smart people. Obviously, the top For it's a hybrid male. It's hybrid because it's black duck and mallard. Although you also call it a hybrid if it's game farm and wild,
Right.
correct? Yep.
Yeah.
Harvested date. All right, so you got species 1, you got species 2. Now at the bottom level is where it kind of gets confusing for the layman
Okay.
or even us. I understand on the right, maternal lineage, that's the mother's genetics. And
Yes.
so what, you're unable to determine the paternal lineage, or what is that? What is the generation unknown wild backcross? What is that telling me?
Yeah. So generation is if you had a 50-50 bird. So true like mallard gadwall hybrid will have 50% mallard and 50% gadwall, right? A true brewer's duck. In which case it's a first generation. We actually had a 50-50 bird for you, we would call it an F1, first generation.
Okay.
If it was 75-25 or 25-75, that's a perfect back cross to one or the other parent, in which case you replace that 50% with 25% of that being the back cross, and thus you would have an F2 generation. When you have hybrid combinations that don't get to the 50-50 or 75-25 arena, that's when I'm like, I don't know what generation this is. So that we know it's a back cross of some sort. It's not black duck, it's not mallard, it's this hybridy thing. That's when that's when we identify as unknown back cross. Does that make sense?
That does.
It does
Yeah,
make sense,
it does now.
but I guess that's why I'm thinking, maybe you should do something else with that line, or you know, or
What would
I
you
mean,
like to see?
well, I
What
mean,
would you do?
well, I guess I haven't done whatever Ancestry or 23andMe or whatever, but I'm assuming
Yeah.
I picture it as like something graphic. You know what I mean? I picture whether it's a flow chart like a tree or a pie chart.
So I have a student that, as we were doing this little talk right now, as we're doing it, he sent me some. We've been working on that. We want to actually. You'd never done 23andMe when it was alive or Ancestry.com, so maybe you didn't see it. But we actually want to put another thing where we have like maybe the first 5 chromosomes, and you could see the painting of the different species on there.
There you
Right?
go.
Yeah,
And you'll
yeah,
There you
see.
go.
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I-
And so it's much more complicated than I expected by
I'm sure, of course. Yeah.
computer wise, but I actually got really nice results just now as we were talking about a true F1 brewer's duck, Mallard Gadwall. We're just working with that for now. Just be like, yeah, that is what I expect. So stay tuned. Maybe provide $4.99 so we can reevaluate your ancestry. I don't know. Yes, we want to do something like that so that way it's clear that so a first generation would basically be like, right, mom is Gadwell and dad is Mallard or which way. And so you would just have one strain is one color and the other strain is the other color, right? So that'd be a perfect F1 generation. F2 will have a single break within one of the parents and replace it with a proportion of the other parent. And in which case that's an F2. So again, in human terms, right, that's how you essentially say like, well, you're 50% German and 25% Irish and whatever. It's the same concept. We're just trying to catch up to a data set that's made up of tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of points for humans. But yeah, we want to do that. The maternal lineage. The maternal lineage is the mitochondrial DNA. If you don't know this, mitochondrial DNA is like this other organelle within our system, so to speak. It's it's what creates ATP or power, energy. And mom gives the same lineage to everybody, brothers and sisters. Dad does not contribute. Mom and dad contribute to the nuclear, so that whole 50-50 thing, but mom contributes mitochondrially to everybody. And the important part here is we distinguish between old world, so Eurasian-based mitochondrial, and new world for the simple fact that 90% of all old world mitochondrial ancestry here is simply due to the fact that we brought game farm mallards here.
Mm.
And so we can identify whether an individual had a game farm mallard history in the past because they carry an old world A. So, for an example, let's say you were an F1 hybrid between a game farm and a wild. In this case, it'll be great, great, great grandma was a game farm mallard. Then their kids back cross into wild mallard, then they back cross to wild mallard, and then they back cross to wild mallard again. Nuclear wise, they're 100% wild, but mitochondrially, they'll still have the old world A because the females will keep passing on old world A every time they breed. And so we can say that at some point there was a game farm ancestry there that was then lost in some amount of generations.
That's kind of stuff that we would dig. You know,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
you know, it's just
Well, I
it's
mean,
just
like,
to
then it
it's
would be
just to
like a
get
whole
it.
paragraph thing, you know?
Mm.
But an important aspect of that is actually because mitochondrial is so different between like gadwall and mallards and pintail and green-winged teal and everything else. When we have a true F1 of a pintail mallard or gadwall mallard or pintail gadwall, we could figure out who the mom was and who the dad was to make that pairing, because we'll have the mitochondrial. So, for example, if you have a bird that is 50-50 mallard gadwall and the mitochondrial was gadwall, that means mom was a gadwall and dad was a wild mallard to make the kid that you harvested.
Maybe we'll get to that in the future. We're still, I think it's fair to say we still have a bit of a shoestring staff and shoestring budget on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Phil, we bug Phil to death with all the additional questions and follow up that happens anytime he sends us a set of results, and our team takes it and makes the certificates. And yes, ideally, we're looking for some additional philanthropic investments to help Phil hire some people to make use of all this good data while also incorporating some of the advances that you're talking about. Phil has also imagined the possibility of sort of painting or drawing the chromosomes from these individual birds so that you can get a different picture of it, and there's some things to be taken away from that. We're also going to be experimenting with the idea and perhaps hopefully implementing as a pilot study, the collecting information on the presence of, let's say, avian influenza through our DuckDNA testing as well. There's a potential partnership that we're exploring there. So we're excited about the opportunities that this DuckDNA platform provides for collecting all sorts of information and engaging hunters in the process of doing so. So folks should keep an eye open for those types of hopeful opportunities this coming year.
Well, we appreciate the efforts that you guys have made. You know, obviously to continue to make the waterfowl population grow and to give us something for participating in this program.
Heck yeah. And I just have to say, there would still be no waterfowl without wetlands. So Ducks Unlimited continue to ensure that the wetlands are there, because if we lose all our wetlands and only have urban, then maybe we'll only have game farm mallards.
Yeah.
That'd be sad.
It would be sad. It would be sad.
Let's
Ducks
get-
Unlimited's position on this is that our success in sustaining North America's waterfowl population should be based on our ability to conserve populations of wild waterfowl.
Yeah.
So that's what our interest is in, and that's the reason, the basis for the habitat conservation that we do all across this continent, and that's what we'll continue to do. And we welcome everybody in helping us achieve that.
Well, we appreciate all that you do, and we only offer our suggestions just as end users to maybe make it a little more easier for us to get our head
100%.
around, around the results, and stuff like that, whether it's more graphics or dumbing it down or adding pictures to the certificate or whatever, I mean,
Absolutely. And we appreciate that.
And we know that this is just the beginning of this, and hopefully you guys will continue with this program and expand it.
Mike, when do you expect the application process to open up again for this year?
That's a good question. We talked about that a few weeks ago. We're probably looking at June, July, something like that. I would say the target's going to be June, which is like, now that I say that, that's only 2 months away, Phil.
Yeah.
So maybe
Maybe you should ask Phil
July.
that.
Yeah, ask Phil. Yeah.
Also, anybody listening that's like, "Where's my certificate for this year?" We got behind because we don't have the $1 million sequencing machine, so we have to send that out. And sometimes they get backed up or they have issues. And this year, unfortunately, we hit a few snags here and there. But rest assured that all the data will come out um, as fast as I can do it.
Yeah, and if I could, a shout out to our team that Phil and I are the ones on here talking about this, but folks like Casey and Katie and Ty and Victoria and Virgie, they're the ones that work in our labs, work in our offices. They're the ones that interact with the hunters. They're the ones that make this possible. Phil and I just kind of get to come on and talk about it and do some of the other thinking and discussion.
Absolutely.
Well, we appreciate you guys spending your time with us. It's a long off season, so I mean, what do we got to do except talk about ducks? So
That's right.
That's right.
so we appreciate all the efforts that you guys are making to keep this project going, and we're willing to keep participating in it as long as you'd like us to.
We
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Certainly apply again.
Well, thank you,
Gentlemen,
Good
thank you both
Yes,
very
thank you
much.
so much for your time. This
Appreciate
has
it.
been great, and continued success. We really appreciate it.
Thanks
Thanks,
so
Sean.
much.
Quack.